Coming up, is the best case scenario for Ben Simmons, the player, the worst case scenario for the Brooklyn Nets basketball team? We dive into it all coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Marmbrick. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We're 100% free on all those great platforms. And let you know, today's episode is sponsored by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. And Doug, baby, we know it's the offseason. Ben Simmons is ramping up, though, in a way, frankly, from a social media perspective, in a stronger push for his health than we've ever seen before in an offseason.
I mean, it's a time-honored tradition, man. It's to get on here right around this time, since the trade, and talk a little Ben Simmons and what it's looking like in the offseason. No one.
I'm gonna miss it when it's gone. I'm gonna miss it when it's gone, Doug. I'm gonna be honest with you.
Oh, baby, me too. I re-sign him just for the offseason content, as far as I'm concerned. No, look, I mean, in all seriousness, we're not gonna get to put the cart too far ahead of the horse here, I don't think. I will say though, the reason we're weighing in on this Ben Simmons thing is because, there was a piece of news, such as it is, that came out in the beginning of the week, because his trainer, Chris Brickley, who we'll go into a little bit, did get on and go on the record with his own social media and say Ben Simmons is back to playing all-star talent basketball. Again, that's a direct quote from Brickley. We'll talk about who he is and like why it, is important that it comes from him and why we should maybe take it with a grain of salt that it comes with him. I'm definitely, I don't think either of us are going to fall victim of the Ben Simmons is all the way back, because I think that ship is too far gone. But if we're looking at little threads to pull on here heading into the season, I'll grade this as a slightly different sort of thing that has been related to Ben Simmons in the past, kind of mostly because who it's coming from, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I mean, listen, if you're going to take the word of someone who you would trust the perspective or opinion on physical play of a player, on health of a player, on ability to get back to some form that we've seen in the past from someone like Ben Simmons, okay, then we'll get into that a little bit deeper here. On a high level, what we're going to talk about over the course of today's episode that we haven't done previously, because when you ask Doug and I our honest opinions about Ben Simmons and what's ultimately going to happen, it typically says he's not going to be 100% healthy. And if he is, he'll probably get injured. And that's not a knock on him, the individual. It's just the track record suggests that. Sure. So ultimately, we don't fear the impact over the course of the season. However, I do think, okay, two things. One, 100% healthy, and then having him say all-star level player. It at least perked up my ears to the idea of what would that impact be to the Brooklyn Nets over the course of this season with the understood agenda of getting to that top lottery pick next year, of being able to reset their franchise. I'll at least say, and we'll get into it more, but I'll at least say, there's a little bit of concern about what his impact would be to this roster if we marked him down for 60 to 65 games this season, not even playing at full 2020 Ben Simmons level, even just kind of the amalgamation of what some of these recent stat seasons could give him if he's healthy.
Yeah, I'm not too concerned with that, mostly because I think the rest of the team is even so bad that wouldn't matter. I feel like they could sprout like two of these guys and then two more Cam Thomases and still not really be at risk. Maybe I'm overstating sort of like what the overall impact of these guys are. I'm just really not worried. I think the talent level on this team is so bad that it's just like I'm not even worried about it. Good news. They did it right. Sean Marks understood the assignment when it came to talent on the team. But just to rewind here from the original post, right? So Chris Brickley is an NBA trainer who has worked with a number of different players like LeBron, KD in the past, works with WNBA players. Has a number of different collegiate athletes on his roster, and is a guy who, by all accounts, is really well respected sort of in the NBA training community, right? And this is a little different, also kind of a little the same as what other things we've heard about in the past, like when Ben Simmons' agent comes out, right? So when Brickley comes out, so a couple things here. When he says this, it's because he's been working with Ben Simmons in the offseason to try to get him back to some level. I will say too, part of his Instagram post had Ben Simmons actually shooting the ball. Not something we typically see. Not something we typically see in Ben Simmons' actual own feed. But Brickley did. There are a number of images of Simmons pulling up for jump shots. So I'll take that as it were. With him, he has a Rolodex of guys that he's worked with in the past who are sort of like who's who. Of like the NBA and kind of the WNBA world also. So this is a guy who has a reputation for working with players at the highest levels and needing for his own business to get the absolute most out of these guys, because that like is what that ends up being the bottom line, right? Like you have to sort of put your money where your mouth is in terms of results when it comes to these players, because ultimately that's your reputation and that's the lifeblood of the business. So you do go out on a limb when you work with these guys. Now, also, when you work with these guys, it benefits you to pump them up heading into the season to let everyone know you're working with them. So there is like a double-edged sword, sort of like where the content comes from. I do find this to be a little different than either A, coming from like just the front office, because they just have their own, they have a very different set of sort of like rules and things that they're following, or just like straight up an agent who's just like there to be the biggest hype man in the world, right? This strikes me as slightly different, and I'm saying this as like has been the guy that's been glass half empty on Simmons for so long and trying to make sure I don't get too far ahead of myself. But I'm just trying to give this quote some context.
No, I think it makes sense because, again, and you mentioned the front office 100%, because they're always, I mean, listen, any front office is always going to be selling their own agenda about any player, let alone the team. You've already seen some of the new way that they're presenting this season for this Brooklyn Nets roster and what it means to be a fan of this team coming into the year. But then you also have, whether it's Ben Simmons, the individual player, we all know what that is. There's ego that drives that. There's also a desire to, or maybe not a desire, but just the inability at times, I think, for the highest level of athletes to acknowledge when they've lost something, when they're not the same player, or when they can't get back to being the same player. And then you said the agent piece. Well, the agent's only concerned about, and I don't mean that negatively, it's their job. They're only concerned about hyping their guy up. Doesn't matter if he's lying flat on the floor, not moving for 3 months straight. They're still going to talk about how the procedures went better, and now it's correcting an injury that maybe they didn't address properly previously. So I think there is a difference to what extent we want to buy into it, but there is a stark difference between someone, as you said, who has their business, their reputation, and has a track record of having success with players like this, coming out and making any type of what feels definitive statement about the state of Ben Simmons' game and what the expectation should be for him coming into this year. And with that, it does beg the question. So I think Doug and I will at least debate this from two different sides coming up here in a minute. If I give you a stat line that Ben Simmons will carry into this season, could it at least marginally impact the agenda that the organization has over the next season? We'll dive into that coming up here in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at Gametime. Look, if you're trying to get tickets, whether it's the sporting event, the concert, the theater, the comedy show, whatever it is, you got to head over to Gametime. They got Gametime picks. Makes getting tickets for your favorite live event that much easier. It filters out the fluff. It's going to show you only incredible deals, great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. I got so many deals up on Gametime right now. You got Patriots at Jets going this Thursday. You got Cowboys at Giants, or the boys in blue. It's a couple weeks from now. It's starting at $91 over there at MetLife Stadium. Maybe you want to grab some Billy Joel. That's up there on Gametime. Also, Gametime's got everything you need if you're heading out to one of these events. They got curated deals. Makes it easy to find the best price and great seats. Super deals. You can see the seats before you even buy. Lowest price guarantee. Event cancellation, job loss protection. It's all there for you over on Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA, $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime.
All right, so as we continue today's Locked On Nets episode, talking about Ben Simmons and now trainer hype. We've seen Ben Simmons hype. We've seen agent hype. We've even seen organizational hype. Now we're getting hype from someone who's working directly with him and suggesting he's back to playing all-star level basketball. Okay, so I need you to take the journey with me here now, Doug, because the one thing I went back and did is I'm curious to see if you'll be willing to move it all on it. You can go back and look at the stats over the course of Ben Simmons' career, and we understand the last two seasons are starkly different than his time in Philadelphia. I even went, though, and knocked out his rookie year, and I also knocked out 2023-24 because he only played in 15 games. So you're getting that dose of 2023 where he played in 42 games for the Brooklyn Nets, 26 minutes a night, 7 points, 6+ rebounds, 6+ assists. Now, if you go in, though, and say, what would be the average of that, to take those out and say, project what he could be, and then go the step further, Doug, and ask the question, give me 70% of that. I'm not asking for 100% version of what that's been of Ben Simmons. Give me 70 cents on the dollar. He's going to be a 10-5-5 player. If I told you right now, 60 games, 65 games of 10-5-5 Ben Simmons playing healthy minutes, would you think that would change the outlook of this team over the course of the season?
No, I'm not worried about it at all.
Does it matter at all if his win shares by season? He's also been a guy, now you have to take into the fact of who he played with, obviously, in Philadelphia, but he has been a guy that offers a 6 now at the peak of it in his rookie season, 9 in a win share, mostly 6. And even if I said, well, the average win share is something between 3 and 5 games in this upcoming season.
No, I'm just not worried about it for a lot of different reasons. And you're saying, I'm just going to qualify what we're worried about here. We're worried about the Nets being too good, right? Like that's like
saying too good is a strong, but just being better than the 18 to 18.5 to 19.5 win projection and bumping where they stand in that lottery, right? Falling.
I'm not worried. No,
category.
Okay. Yeah. There's so many reasons I'm not worried about this at all. Even if he returned to honestly, even if he returned to peak Sixer Ben Simmons, which I do not think if there's any real risk of here.
Right. Even if he returned 79 games playing to a 17, 9 and 8 basically line.
Yeah, but so yes, that around that line, I'm not concerned. One, there's a multiple reasons, which I will quickly outline. One, please. The Nets are not motivated to win, and when you're not motivated to win, it's very easy to lose. Okay, let's just start there. When you when you go into a season not wanting to win, believe me, it is not hard to lose, right? Teams can work this any number of different ways. So just right there. This is where I think all this sort of existential dread that Nets fans feel about the team being, quote, too good to outstrip their lottery position is just they're not the Nets. It's just not going to happen, right? They're just the Nets. Two, let's say he even returned to that level. The Nets talent level is just not high enough across the board to even maintain anything else anyway. They just don't have anyone even close to all-star level. Maybe Cam Thomas pours in 1 million points. Let's say even those two guys are playing close to all-star level. The drop-off, once you assume that these other guys are getting traded because there's just Nets are not hanging on to these guys, and they're just going to rest guys or whatever, the drop-off is so stark to these next group of players that even if these guys played at the ultimate level, I wouldn't even be worried about it. And then 3, even when we go back and look at those, and I hate to drag Simmons here, but even if you go back and look at those Philly years, if you take the look at Simmons's numbers when Embiid wasn't on the court, the team was just below average, from a net rating standpoint, right? And they had actual sharpshooters around him at the time and had guys that sort of did fit with his core skill set, which is to run, gun, and shoot threes. That's what they did with those times when Embiid was off the court. Even then, over 2,000 minutes. No, sorry. Well, 1,890 minutes.
Doug. Give me the exact minutes.
I was looking at them together. I was looking at Embiid and those guys together.
Yep.
They played with Simmons, no Embiid. It was almost 2,000 minutes of a negative net rating. So even if he got those stats, there's not tons of proof that style contributes to crazy outpaced winning, right? And so for those 3 reasons, I'm just not concerned about it even in the slightest.
And that's, listen, they call that setting up your teammate for an easy win, right? A couple episodes ago, we were grading out fan takes. This was, I gave an alley-oop, and Doug Norrie gave you a Vince Carter jam. Yeah, I mean, I think that the last point that you made there is the most important one. Go back and look, because what do the Nets not have right now? A Joel Embiid type player. And that's not about individual talent. It's the specific role of talent that Joel Embiid is, right? A big that can stretch the floor in the way that he does, that can be dominant the way that he is defensively, all those things. We all understand who Joel Embiid is as a basketball player. Not having that and then combining with what it's like when you don't have that player projects very differently for what Ben Simmons will be able to do in terms of a win-loss impact, changing the projection of the season. The other big factor here, I think, in it is obviously the one that we've talked about a lot going back over the entire time that Ben Simmons has been on this team. You don't have a Joel Embiid, but you do have a Nicholas Claxton, a guy that specifically cannot work with Ben Simmons, right? So it's not only that you don't have this player that would elevate Ben Simmons, you also have a player that presents those problems that we talked about before. Now, we don't have sample sizes on Noah Clowney and some different combinations, and I don't think any of these things are to drag, as you said, what these players can do, how they can develop, the leap that they can take. But relative to wins and losses, or relative to to Ben Simmons even playing at an all-star caliber level, I don't know. There is a part of me that just says they're projected to win 18 and a half now is the over-under. And let's say that they're going to win 19 games. The beauty of it probably is that even if Ben Simmons played healthy basketball and late game sequences, he makes a couple of those special plays that we've seen him be capable of in his career. He locks down a couple of guys defensively. All of a sudden, you've got him and Claxton and Clowney. They're all switching everywhere. It's a juggernaut defensively. Give them 2 more wins. Give them 3 more wins. It's not going to dramatically change where those lottery odds go. Understanding where the top few picks are and the 14% to get the number 1. That's probably actually the safeguard against any of this is, unless you tell me, and most data would convince you it's impossible, that Ben Simmons is going to equate to 5, 6, 7 wins over the course of this season. That's actually, I think, the safeguard here for Nets fans or for the organization too. Even 3 more wins on Ben Simmons' ledger as an individual player won't dramatically change where they stand. They're the only team coming into the year with a sub 20 win projection total right now. So they actually have a margin for themselves as well relative to the rest of the league.
Do you know what Ben Simmons and Nick Claxton's net rating is when you take off KD and Kyrie? Because if you look at it, if you just put them together, you get a positive net rating, and you're like, oh wait, because I went back three plus years. Now it's not a ton of minutes, but but actually the fact that it's even fewer minutes makes this number even more disturbing.
How much damage they did in so little time.
Oh, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. So if you strip out, take off the KD and Kyrie minutes, which are going to just like floor raise on basically any combination, right? Take those guys out. These guys played 166 minutes together. Before we hit this break, you have a guess around what their net rating was in those 166 minutes? I can't even say this number.
I'm going to go bullish. I'm going to say minus 65.
Oh, geez, you went way too. You're guessing with my wife.
Sorry. I want to be fun.
The guess is always so bad.
Minus 22.
Oh, close. Okay, so when we got a real guess.
Thank you.
Not like my wife guess, which is like the guess is always so bad that it just ruins the answer. It ruins what the actual answer is one way or the other. Minus 22.97, minus 23 net rating.
Oh, I got
95.39.
I'm gonna take out the first guest in post and then just go with the second one.
95.39 offensive rating. Gosh. I mean, which is like you literally can't score. It's like me and you out there. Yeah. And then you get 118.36 defensive rating. So it wasn't even like they made up for it on defense. A problem on defense you often have is that when you miss every shot, you can never set your defense. So like sometimes the best defense is a good offense because when you make your shots, you don't get cross match. You're not out in transition. Like you're not just like sort of caught off guard with how the other team is going. You do kind of need some offense for the defense to be good. Otherwise, again, you get cross match to death. So the defense has been absolutely horrid when these guys are on the court together. All right. Well,
coming up here in a second. Coming up here in a second, I'm going to respond to that defensive rating piece, which I think is always overlooked when it comes to the Ben Simmons, Nicholas Claxton minutes. And then also, though, still talk about that silver lining around the trade deadline for the Brooklyn Nets and a healthy, productive, all-star caliber Ben Simmons. We'll do that coming up next.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. Look, it's FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, FanDuel's got it going with you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers just got to bet $5. You're going to get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. You get the YouTube TV base plan. You're going to be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. You just need that Google account, current form of payment, cancel anytime. I told you the other day that YouTube TV, absolute lifesaver over the weekend when I get dragged to a birthday party with the kids. I mean, who does this? What these people out there that are scheduling these Sunday afternoon football season birthday parties have to be stopped. Anyway, they couldn't be stopped in time. Didn't matter for me. I had YouTube TV. I was rocking every single game with that because of FanDuel. Make sure you go check out the deal now. Visit FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook.
All right, so as we tie a bow on the Locked On Nets podcast, we, of course, remind you that you're making us your first listen of the day. But for your second listen, guys, go enjoy Locked On NBA podcast. There's no offseason for the NBA, a month away from the regular season starting, but it's all good and it all needs to be covered. And that's why the Locked On NBA podcast provides you with daily basketball analysis from the national and local experts in 30 minutes or less. No one keeps you as informed or entertained as Locked On NBA. Again, unless you're about being the Nets fans, and then you want to watch Locked On Nets. But it's available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and it's your team, and it's every day. Okay, so the last thing here before we talk about the deadline, because I actually think there's a silver lining to all of this. There's actually positives, theoretically, for the Brooklyn Nets and Ben Simmons being healthy. That defensive thing, I think, is so critical to remind everybody about, because you always talk about two non-shooters on the offensive end and all the spacing problems it creates, and it makes issues for other offensive players, and the defense can really pick and choose their matchups. It becomes a mess. Defensively, they were in a small sample size, but they were bad there too. And, maybe the health thing plays into this for Ben Simmons, but we talked about it over these last 2 years with him, where it just never looked like. He has not been the same player. Now, you want to tell me 100% healthy, okay, great. But it was not the same version of defensive player. And the one thing I think people also may forget about is not only has he dealt with injuries, he's also just getting older. Like, he's not the rookie year 2018-19 version of himself from a physical standpoint. That's going to change how quick you are defensively, how fast you rotate, get in front of defenders, and that's going to diminish at times even a valuable player like Nicholas Claxton, to go along with what you said there about if you got no one to shoot it or a lot of non-shooters on the floor, suddenly you're running back in transition defense, and that's not the best version of that team if you had those two players out there.
Yeah, everyone always, I'm convinced everyone forgets this all the time. Like, you go back to those old Warriors teams, they were awesome on defense, and they had great defenders, right? Don't get me wrong. Clay and Draymond, are great defenders, right? The other reason that team was awesome on defense was because they made every shot. And so they make every shot, and then they're all the way back and set up, and they can just do whatever they want to defensively, and they're already ready to go, and they have time to reset themselves and get everything squared away perfectly. When you miss every shot, which is what's going to happen a lot of times when you when you just have these two guys on the court together, what ends up happening is you just are put at such a disadvantage all the time. So you might have the best defenders in the world, but it's going to be very hard to sort of maintain any semblance of order. Plus, I will say the defense, we talked about this many times, defense is often about effort, and your effort wanes significantly when you're not making any shots. And it's just so much harder to lock in, and you're just struggling on one end and it translates to the other end. I'm convinced that happens. We just see it all the time with guys. It's very hard to lock in on both sides when one side is going completely terribly. Right. Yeah. And it's much easier to lock in offensively because that's the more fun side to play. Right. So I'm just right. and unlike on offense, to some degree on defense does matter. If 1.5 guys aren't all the way locked in, you are kind of screwed. Right. Yes. So you might actually be picking up your assignment perfectly. But if 1.5, 2 guys on your team are just not feeling it because the ball's not going in, then you're down. Unlike offense, where you can kind of get away with it because you can have kind of one guy or two guys create. If 2 guys aren't into it, now you're 60% down on who you need, or excuse me, 40% down on who you need to actually be out there kind of playing. So it's much more of a cohesive thing. And by the way, real quick, if you look at the defense, where if you put Simmons, Claxton, Durant, and KD on the court together, for the 300 minutes they actually played together, well, the defensive rating goes up 6 points to 113. Right. And Kyrie, I mean, say what you will, it's not like he's super high in defender. I'm telling you right now, it's because the offensive rating went through the roof to 123, and all of a sudden defense got easier, right? You replace. It's not like KD's a great defender, so don't get me wrong, but it's not like you can't convince me that the defense didn't get better just that because the offense was better. That's the reason. The offense was better, and they were able to just lock in on defense easier, right?
Yeah,
I'm sure that's the thing.
There's probably numbers around missed basket percentages, transition opportunities for opposition as it correlates between having guys making more buckets versus having a lackluster offense. And then
when you have a 95 offensive rating, how excited could anybody be to play basketball? You know what I mean?
Point stop. Who could want to participate in games?
Who's going to want to stay out there? You literally can't score. 95 is as bad as you'll ever see. You cannot see numbers worse than this. So I just can't. Yeah. You can't convince me that guys can get excited about that situation.
So there's 2 things that I want to touch on here before we close out. One is that Ben Simmons then also falls into this category. Again, let's assume 100% health for him. By the way, we mentioned Cam Johnson as being a guy, you'll trade him at some point. We'll see what happens. But let's assume he's healthy too, because he has some of those nagging injuries. The deadline always is going to offer the Brooklyn Nets, unlike other years. We know how Sean Marks, he drives a hard bargain. He sets a high price point. He never wanes on it. But this year, because you already have all those coffers, you may get towards the deadline and say on any of those guys. And I am curious because, again, you pay out some of that contract. It's the last year of his deal. Let's say that Ben Simmons is healthy. I think there would be teams that would be interested, especially ones that maybe have multiple years left on a bad contract that they'd like to move off of. There could be some negotiation room there as well. But my biggest question would be, how many games do you think, if the Brooklyn Nets are looking to move some of the product here, how many games do you think of good Ben Simmons basketball will it take before there's legitimacy to the idea that teams would be interested in taking a flyer on him for the remainder of this season? Because I can project that any team that does it is going to say, you're not the Brooklyn Nets. You're not in the Brooklyn Nets. It's not where you were supposed to be a starter. You may come off the bench for us. Like, we're going to give you what your role is going to be over the remainder of the year. Do you think 15, 20 good games of Ben Simmons starts to bubble that up when the year gets underway? Or is it going to take that full half season getting to the deadline to even have people like start to be convinced the health is going to hold over the remainder of the year?
He's just got too much baggage. I think it would have to be like every game, no injury setback, numbers super sick, and you would still have front offices that'd be like, no thanks. Like, I think that I just don't think. I mean, for sure the number exists probably, but based on the contract,
I think if his numbers are solid and teams that have bad contracts that want to shed him, like that fringe playoff kind of group, I think there's discussions probably to have there. Probably a whole other episode to have on it. And you're definitely going to be doing some needle threading to get there.
There's just so many problems. There's so many problems because one, you have the history, both the mental side. I'm going to call the mental side the part where he just didn't come back and play for the Sixers. I don't mean like mental illness. I mean like he just didn't say he was injured really there in that time and just said he didn't want to play. So that's where I'm using that. I'll call it emotional side. Then you have the physical side, which is well documented, multiple back surgeries. Then you have the fit issues, which we just mentioned with Claxton. So you have all kinds of fit issues with any team that he was going to probably go into. That's like just not going to be optimized for his skill set anyway. So there's just too many problems. So I think and then obviously the contract. So I think once you add all those things together, you just have a front office to be like, you know what? There's just, why would we even get into that business? I don't even know. And I'm saying at the trade deadline, he's played every game at pre Ben Simmons levels, and he has not been injured at all. I still think that these teams would be like, I don't know. I kind of value my job, and this one kind of looked pretty bad. I don't know.
For all of the things we talk about, the stat lines, scoring on the offensive end and what that would look like, I actually think one of the most important needle movers to that would be if he gets himself to be a lockdown defender. If we see that version of him on the defensive end, that might actually be more enticing to other teams than anything else, pushing the pace, the rebounds, the assists. That's all great. But I think some teams might look at it as, if I'm going to take a chance on him, it's actually going to be because of his size, his length, and his ability maybe to come in and pick up defensive matchups that we don't currently have the personnel to handle, especially when you think about the back stretch of a season. But I do overall agree with you. There's a lot of boxes, and a lot of boxes that are going to be hard to check before you get to that point. Bottom line is, we'll take any positive news about him, because I think all of these things at least create more options potentially for the Brooklyn Nets entering this year. There's no downside to him being healthy. That's what we've covered over the course of this episode. Doesn't matter if he improves the potential win total. Doesn't matter if he plays in like 2020 Ben Simmons. It's all going to be relative to the Nets' overall agenda. So give me a healthy Ben Simmons, because it just may lead to the Nets getting something else as they continue their rebuild process.
All right, we're going to get out of here. Much appreciate everyone rocking with us through the off season. Season not too far away. It's a little over a month away. We'll be at you 5 days a week. Now, until then, make sure you subscribe to Locked On Nets wherever you listen to the podcast. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Nets over on YouTube as well.
If I ever make a lot of money in the NBA, I'm going to have this massive tank, and it's going to have an alligator on it. That is Benjamin Simmons.
One of the all-time great posts. We're back in tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball.